Hello and welcome back to another episode of a Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. I'm Dan, joined as ever by Owain. Owain, how are you doing today?
Yeah, good. Yeah. How are you?
Hot,
Yeah, it's really
hot.
hot.
But other than
Summer.
that, yeah,
One day of the year where it's actually too hot.
I know. I quite like jogging though. I quite like it. I don't mind it. Like I did an hour this evening, 28 degrees. It's quite pleasant.
It's worth it for the heat gains.
Exactly. Well, it's not going
Yeah,
to work though because it's going to be cold by Sunday probably. So yeah, 1 week isn't enough, is it? As we've discussed many times. But
yeah,
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 nice change. It's
yeah,
just, but I've just been jogging for 2 weeks pretty much. So yeah, it's trying to do some intensity will be a bit more difficult.
yeah. That's me on my treadmill in the garage tomorrow morning.
Yeah, yeah. I went on a treadmill this morning because I was downstairs, so I had to sort of semi-supervise him. I did 40 minutes on my treadmill. He let me do 40 minutes on my treadmill, which was nice of him. But yeah, it was pretty toasty, even with a fan on. But can't complain. Mileage whilst I'm looking after my son. That's when you appreciate running, even if
Yeah,
it's on a treadmill when it's like 20 odd degrees outside.
yeah.
Yeah.
And talking about things that will keep you cool, we're sponsored as always by Saw. Yeah, check out the Saw gear. It's the go-to gear for this hot weather. Yeah, at the weekend it was super humid, and I just had my Saw shorts and Saw top on, and yeah, felt as cool as could be in really hot weather. And I'd like to think I looked pretty good when I got a coffee afterwards. Yeah, it fulfills two roles of keeping you cool when you run, and then you look good when you go get a post-run coffee.
And your
Um,
croissant and your cake. Is that
it was
right?
big slab of Victoria sponge. Yeah, it's on my Strava if you want to go check it out.
Yeah. I,
Um,
I love that segue, by the way. That was a fantastic
yeah,
segue. Super smooth. Super
yeah,
smooth. Anyway, yeah, go check out Saw. This episode we've just recorded, I really enjoyed this. So, chatting to Dustin Joubert, who probably is more, I would say, is in our circles, is probably more famous for his Instagram account, which you've got to remind me what it's called.
Lab Rat Rundown.
Lab Rat Rundown. I've been following it for years and just thinking, yeah, this is cool. This is cool, and it's just I guess his main research area is effects of super shoes on running economy, running economy more broadly, but most of it is looking at the effects of super shoes, which is obviously a really cool area to be researching, but interesting for the everyday runner, and it's got obviously very direct ramifications for performance and making you run faster. So we talk a lot about the testing that you do to establish running economy, talking about some of his case study work, which shoes he responds really well to, which ones not so much, looking at the effects of running economy in Crocs versus Alpha Flies. It was just an really enjoyable interview. Some really good takeaways there. Um, Anything else I
Yeah,
think we should say
I would,
beforehand?
I would say as well. Just he's got a really nice blend of yeah, published research on super shoes, but then also, like he mentions a lot, case study work where it's an N of one, often him. Um, and yeah, that sort of mix of yeah, the stuff that gets through, as he talks about, gets through peer review, but also just going and testing stuff in the lab and seeing what works, which is a really cool, you know, as much as anything, a really cool job.
I know,
like,
yeah, because
yeah,
I've done it. I've talked about it before. I've done a bit of this stuff, a lot of myself, and yeah, with some people who have visited the hub as well. And I always find it really interesting. And just something simple like changing your shoes can massively change your performance.
yeah,
Where actually to have the same impact through training would take months of training, whereas you can just chuck on a pair of shoes and be 2 to 3% faster. Right? Crazy
yeah,
stuff. Crazy
yeah,
stuff.
and yeah, people really get into the sort of shoe chat as well. because yeah, it is something we can manipulate and change, and you generally feel quite a big difference, don't you? Like I remember that first time I put on a pair of super shoes and just went out to jog in them, and was just like, these are amazing. They feel terrible when you're jogging, and then I just remember the rocker sort of shape in the Adidas, the first Adidas super shoe was like, it felt like you were falling off the back of the shoe until you ran at a good pace, and then it was like, okay, this is mad. And we sort of talk about that step change that's happened since
Yeah.
2016.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
yeah,
did, my first pair was for 4%, and I remember just going out jogging in them like you, and just laughing, thinking like, flipping heck, this is just like easy. And then the
yeah,
next day, I think back when I worked in miles, I was preparing for Brighton Marathon. I did 20 miles at 5:30 a mile pace one week in normal trainers. Um, and then the next week put on these 4% as like a final test before Brighton. Ran 20 miles at 5:20 a mile pace. Heart rate was exactly the same. I was just, and the conditions were pretty similar. I was just thinking, oh my God, this is insane.
yeah,
This is insane. And now it's just the norm. But
yeah,
yeah, it's still like having that perspective of where shoe technology has come from is yeah, really interesting.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, Dustin compares the super shoes now as well, and his trusty controls that we sort of talk about as well. Yeah, no, really, really, really enjoyable chat. Yeah, I enjoyed that. And yeah, hopefully everyone enjoys listening too. I think that's it from us, probably.
Yeah, enjoy it.
Yeah,
Enjoy it.
enjoy. So we're joined today by Dustin Joubert. Dustin is an associate professor at the University of Louisiana, but he's also the, I guess, runner of Lab Rat Rundown on Instagram, which, if you haven't seen it, is just a really, really cool resource for super shoe research. And the way Dustin presents the research is really cool as well. It's really clear the differences between super shoes that he's tested in the lab. So yeah, we're really looking forward to sort of talking through some super shoe research and applied work with Dustin today. So yeah, thanks for joining us, Dustin.
Thanks, guys. It's excited to chat with y'all.
First question, not shoe related, but I did have a look, and I was just curious on your own running history. I couldn't find anything apart from a post about some spikes that were 20 years old. So I was curious, what's your sort of running history? Are there any PBs that stand out?
Yeah, so those 20-year-old spikes would have been the ones I ran in high school. So I unfortunately I think I ran 9:28 for 3,200 meters in those in high school and never got much faster than that running in college. So I ran 5 years in the U.S. NCAA system over here, but did some triathlon stuff throughout graduate school, and then try to run one marathon a year for the last several years now, but I think I'm always kind of falling short of my real potential. But having a 6-year-old and a full-time job and juggling all that, it's like, if I'm running 30 miles a week with a good long run, I'm pretty happy. But
That's still a solid training routine there. Have you ticked off any of the majors?
I've done Boston, ran 253 at Boston a few years back now. I'd like to run New York, maybe Chicago, but I don't mind doing kind of the local stuff too. So
Yeah,
makes it easier
nice.
on the fan.
So I guess to dive straight in with super shoes. I guess since it's 2016 is, I guess, the year of super shoes. That's when did they made their debut at the, am I right in saying the US Olympic trials was there, the Nike shoe released, and then obviously then appeared at the Olympics.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair. And then your men's podium at the Olympics is pretty much your Vaporfly origins there, right?
Yeah,
But people didn't. My understanding is people didn't know about it about time point, did they?
Right. Yeah. It was kind of like the mysterious shoe that only certain athletes had. And kind of, if you follow from 2016 on, it's like, I think it's the year 2019, like the World Marathon Majors. I have a graphic somebody put together with like the World Marathon Majors in 2019. It was like, almost every podium finisher is in that, Nike Vaporfly iteration. So yeah, it was like kind of that time span for 4 or 5 years after that, where it was like, they had the Vaporfly 4% study. The Hochheimer's like original study on the prototype, and that was validated by some independent labs. But that question of like, is the playing field level, really like persisted for a good 5-6 years after Rio, I think. And that's kind of where like I picked up into the super shoe research. I was like running a little more serious again. I picked up a pair of like carbon plated racers, like Hoka's first iteration, and trained in them, and they felt different. Like you could feel like the stiffness to them, the rigidity of them, right? And I was like, it feels different. Trained for a race in them, bonked bad in a marathon. And then I was about to buy a second pair of those. This is probably 2021, I'm thinking. I was about to buy a second pair, maybe 2020. And I was like, well, I've got a Met card in the lab. Maybe I should run, test my running economy in these compared to just a control flat, like the old school racing flat. And I was getting no benefit when I tested them. So I was like, maybe not buy a second pair of these. But the original Alpha Flies were like out around that same time, and I was able to nab a pair. And so I got a pair of those, tested them, and on myself, just N = 1 kind of case study test. And sure enough, I was like 4.5% better right out of the box in the new Alpha Fly. So I was like, this is kind of, it's not just everyone's suspicions, right? When you got people like, spray painting their shoes black to run in the Nike shoe at the time, right? It's not everyone's just suspicion. Maybe there's real data behind this, right? And so that kind of launched like the first super shoe comparison study that we did back, I guess, 2021, where we got, 7-8 pairs of super shoes and had, a dozen or so runners to come in and test those.
And I guess if we want to sort of break down what benefit the super shoes actually make to a runner, like you present it really well. They improve your running economy, but do you have any sort of, I guess maybe the answer isn't completely clear exactly what they're doing, but what are your maybe thoughts on what they change? A pair of super shoes versus your control, which I think is a sort of old pair of Asics racing flats, isn't it? So yeah. What's the difference that between those two shoes?
Yeah, so I guess kind of starting out broadly, like you mentioned, kind of like the applied physiology is fairly easy to measure with a metabolic cart in the lab. You look at someone's oxygen consumption or energy expenditure at a fixed speed. And so improved running economy is illustrated by a reduction in oxygen consumption or energy expenditure. So when people throw out those percent values, we're referring to like sort of that reduction in energy costs or oxygen costs. But the biomechanics behind that, and I'm a physiologist. I'll be the first one to tell you in every conversation I'm a physiologist, not a biomechanist. But and really the biomechanists have been the ones to do the footwear research more. But if you look at the studies that looked at biomechanics, like you see, with the increased like longitudinal bending stiffness from the carbon plate in these shoes, you see like reduced work at the MTP joint, metatarsal phalangeal joint, like the big toe, not having to work as much because it's stiffer through there. Maybe some reduced work at the ankle, kind of altering like the lever at the ankle. But that's kind of the extent of like the biomechanics stuff. Not a lot of like big differences at energy at the hip or the knee. And even if you look at that isolated stuff at the ankle and the foot, it doesn't really explain like the whole systemic 4% differences. So I think kind of the jury is still out on exactly like what the biomechanical causes that lead to the kind of systemic effects. In terms of like the shoe materials themselves, we kind of characterize AFT or advanced footwear technology as these shoes with this more compliant and resilient foam, this rigid moderator like a carbon plate, and then kind of more of a rocker profile. And I think from the studies that have kind of mechanistically tried to like dissect pieces of the shoes, it seems like the foam is certainly an essential piece, probably the most important piece, but that kind of synergy with the plate, helping to interact with more of the foam, helping to provide some of that stiffness to the foot and ankle. It probably all goes together. And we see like early iterations of all these shoes that kind of just haphazardly maybe swap some of those ingredients together, but not right, kind of the right formula or right kind of piecing it together all together. You didn't see the same effects across the board. And so it's maybe not as simple as one thing, but those would be some of the key pieces, I think.
I guess an important factor also seems to be that they've managed to add this technology, but keeping the weights quite low as well. So these new generation foams are actually like very resilient and have a lot of energy return, but also aren't adding a lot of weight. And that seems to be the direction that super shoes are going now, isn't it? That they've they're now slimming down again in terms of like cutting out as much weight as you can, because
Yeah.
stack height has been limited by World Athletics, isn't it? To 40 millimeters. So what else can you do to a shoe?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And, before super shoes, people would have sort of like, uh, laughed at this big 40 millimeter shoe that, added an ounce to it from like your really minimal racing flat, and been like, no way, we're going to race as light as possible, right? Without my legs breaking or falling off. And that kind of like changed with, the advent of AFT. And you're right that like these higher stack compliant resilient foams are still really low density. They're really light. But you did see an increase in the mass of the shoes. You compare like an Alpha Fly to like an old school racing flat, like it like overall probably was an increase in mass of the shoe, right? And people kind of like were hesitant about that at first, but then when you saw the benefits, it's like, oh, okay, this is the real deal. But I think you're right. I think that's where like the current iterations of super shoes are now. It's like, hey, we built these things up. Now we still know mass. Like, the dogma is 100 grams is like 1% economy. And so, if you take 50 grams off a shoe, maybe you can improve economy by half a percentage point. And so I think you built these things up, and then now they're kind of like sort of minimizing, shredding them back down, like to the only the essential pieces. I think if you look at like the new Puma Fast R3 that's gotten all the attention, and the preprint study from Hokamer's group that showed, like, what is it, 12 out of 12 or 16 out of 16 subjects in that study compared to like the other top super shoes from other brands, had better economy in that shoe, not just by a small margin, by a big margin. And if you look at kind of like what they did with that shoe, they really started to strip down only the most essential pieces, like where people were interacting with the foam the most or reinforcing the plate in the areas that it needed. And, but, restricting weight everywhere else. And so I think, yeah, you kind of see that trend going back towards the emphasis on lighter and lighter materials. But
have you managed to get a hand on one of those Puma shoes into your lab to have a look at
I
them?
did. Yeah. Yeah. So that preprint came out, and it was, pretty impressive, and those are well-respected researchers. So even if that's kind of a Puma supported study, I didn't have any reason to like doubt their findings. Right. And so yeah, I got a pair. It took me a while. I'm out of shape at the moment, but it took me a while to actually get into the lab with them. But yeah, I tested them against, if anybody's followed my lab rat rundown account for like case study testing, the shoe that's been number one for me forever is just the original Alpha Fly. Like, it's always beat everything else in the mix. It's kind of averages out around 4% benefit for me, and I always have like the same control shoe. So I think I've tested like 2-3 dozen super shoes against it over the years, and it's never been defeated. So and so yeah, I tested the Puma, and it beat the Alpha Fly by a good 2% for me. So that's like I said, no reason to doubt that study, but that's pretty convincing kind of personal case study data for me. So so yeah, it was impressive, I think.
I found the same. I've had one person come to the lab, original Alpha Fly, and the new Puma, and I can't remember the exact margin, but the Puma was like definitely better, like outside of measurement error, like probably around 1.5-2%. That must have been that sort of ballpark. But I think one of the questions for me on Matt's shoe is, I've not managed to get myself a pair yet. I would definitely want to try them out, but are they supportive enough, cushioned enough to really maintain those economy advantages in the back end of a marathon? Because they are pretty stripped down, aren't they?
Yeah, but
you got any thoughts on that?
I mean, when I put them on, I don't feel like I'm wearing like some minimal shoe again, right? Like when you go to like old school racing flat that's 3-4 ounces or something, that like feels like there's no support at all. I think the thing that I always tell people when we're doing like case study testing on shoes in the lab is like, you should race in your most economical shoe that you can take a given distance. So certainly if that shoe tests best for you economically in the lab, you should try it out for some, 2-hour long runs and make sure that you're comfortable wearing it in that distance. I haven't run 2 hours in it yet, but I mean, just having tested a lot of shoes and running a lot of shoes, I didn't have any concerns. Like when I put that on foot, that like, oh, this seems like not enough shoe for that distance. It's light, but it's not like stripped down of everything. It seems like it has the cushioning where you want it.
Yeah, that's the whole idea, I guess, isn't it? It's a nice preprint to read as well about that study. It's pretty digestible. If anyone wants to go look that up, we can put it in the show notes. Can you tell us in a bit more detail how you go about actually assessing someone's economy in the lab? Like what metrics variables you're looking at, and how do you go about what's the protocol that you use to assess the economy differences?
Yeah. So listeners are probably more familiar with like testing VO2 max in the lab. So using a metabolic cart where you're got a mask or a mouthpiece on and you're collecting your expired gases to measure how much oxygen you're consuming, how much CO2 you're producing. And typically people think of that as like doing an incremental test to exhaustion to determine your maximal aerobic capacity or your VO2 max. But we know with economy, your submaximal oxygen consumption at a fixed speed, it may be even more indicative of performance, right? So how efficient or economical you are. So what we do, the standard protocol that's probably most widely used in the footwear research is you need stages that are ideally like 5 minutes in length so that you reach steady state oxygen consumption. You need intensities that you're testing at that are like below threshold so that you don't have like a significant slow component in VO2 kinetics and that you really like reach a steady state VO2. So typically we try to like test below people's lactate threshold, whether that's like estimated from, half marathon or 10K or where we spot check with lactates and make sure they're like below 4 millimoles, or just kind of visualizing like the VO2 response to see that they reach steady state VO2. So you want at slow enough speeds. Ideally, like we're probably testing most people at like, if we're doing individualized case study testing at like their marathon pace. And so 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, alternating shoes. And ideally we test shoes in duplicate to reduce like noise and variability. So you can get the average across 2 trials in a given shoe. So if we were just comparing, let's say 3 shoes, we would do shoe A, shoe B, shoe C, and then reverse the order on the back end, shoe C, shoe B, shoe A. So kind of like a duplicate mirrored order, we refer to it as. So 5 on, 5 off, alternating through like that. So in a single day session, which is nice because anything you can do within day, you reduce the variability of the person and your equipment. Whereas if you're coming across multiple days, you're just going to introduce noise into your testing that you don't want to do. And so it's submaximal, 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off. If you're doing 3 shoes like that, that's like a 60-minute session total. So that's not, too bad to do in the lab, and it's not too fatiguing for the individual. I mean, even we've stretched out 4 or 5 shoes. So you're looking at like 8 to 10 reps like that. I wouldn't go much longer than that, but that'd be the typical protocol we see. There's a lot of downtime in the lab. You're kind of twiddling your thumbs in between reps. And
Yeah. And I guess just for the listeners, just to clarify why you can't go above threshold is that VO2 slow component. So as soon as you go above your LT2, your critical speed, whatever you want to call it, even if you maintain that speed, oxygen consumption is just going to drift upwards over time until eventually, if you keep maintaining that intensity, you'll get to VO2 max. And the further you are above your threshold, obviously, the quicker you're going to get to your VO2 max, but not ideal for shoe testing when you're talking about trials that are lasting 30 plus minutes.
Yeah, that becomes interesting because there's a variety of ways to try to control for that. I mean, I think just kind of visually looking at the VO2 response, you can kind of confirm steady state or look at like, percent difference in oxygen consumption between like minute 4, minute 5. But when you start looking at some of these studies that like try to claim that people are high responders and low responders, really if your VO2 shoots up in the control shoe, because you don't quite reach like a real steady state, right? And you're on that like kind of slow component rise. That's going to make like the percent benefit on any shoe that you did reach steady state look like a bigger benefit, right? So I have some suspicions that like some people's claims in the lit of like high responders maybe is more associated with that than anything else. But we could talk more about claims around high and low responders in sports science research, but.
I guess on that note, I've got one more question before I let Owain ask one, if that's all right.
That's right.
What is your take on? You seem to think that everyone is a responder, and I would probably agree with you. But do you think, do you agree with that? And also, as a follow up, do you think there is much variability on the individual response to a given shoe? So, is the Alpha Fly the most economical for most people? Or do you think that really does depend upon your biomechanics and other variables?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So kind of 2 big questions to tackle. I think on the first part, is everyone a responder? I'd say not necessarily. but like, let's just say like the most studied super shoe is like some iteration of the Vaporfly going from like prototypes to current iterations, right? And if you look at pretty much like any study that's tested that shoe at like 7-minute mile pace or faster, I mean, you're like 99% response rate. Like everyone is improving to some degree. I think, yeah, there's several studies in the lit that you find almost all of their subjects improved. We've got a paper at slower speeds at like 8:30 mile pace, 9:40-ish mile pace, more like 3:30 to 4:15 marathon paces. It's not 100% of the subjects that were benefiting at those paces. I think at that slowest pace, so like for 4-hour plus marathoner in that Vaporfly shoe compared to like our standard control shoe that was mass matched, maybe like 30% of the subjects had the opposite response, or a negative response, you might say, right? So there's probably a little nuance to that, but I think, by and large, like it's pretty convincing the benefits of AFT for a lot of the speeds that you would expect runners interested in those shoes to be tested at. In terms of comparisons across shoes, I think there's probably some more variability there, right? Like is the Alphafly the best shoe for me, but maybe not the best shoe for you? I think when we first did that study that compared like, 6-7 different super shoes, I think everybody's like initial take on that was going to be like, oh, you're not going to find anything because it's all individual, right? It's all individual. But we found sort of like 3 tiers of shoes, right? The ones that kind of leveled up to the Nike Vaporfly, kind of the mid tier, and kind of duds that were on the level of the control shoe. And we couldn't make like statistical conclusions like that if there wasn't enough consistency between subjects, right? So it wasn't completely like individual variability. There's certainly some good shoes and some bad shoes at that time. I think overall the market's probably improved, and there probably still are some shoes that, like, for most people, like me, look at that Puma shoe and the most recent data out there on that, that you can say probably for a lot of people is going to be the better shoe. But yeah, I don't discount that there's individual variability. I'm a big proponent of like individual case study testing. I do a lot of that myself. I know you've done some of that, and I offer that as like a low cost fee-based thing that people from the community can come into our lab and test to see. I think anybody who's ever considered doing like VO2 max or lactate threshold kind of physiological testing, to me, it makes a lot more sense in the current environment to go do some running economy shoe testing. It's probably a better bang for your buck when it comes to physiological testing.
Yeah, like we said sort of before we started recording that Dan does some of this testing, and for us in the UK, like if you're looking at going to like Valencia Marathon and spending £500-600, you might as well know that you're also wearing the best pair of shoes for the job. I guess one of my questions was going to be, is there, not to necessarily say that you don't need to go get tested, but is there any characteristics of shoes that you find generally ties up with also being the most economical? You sort of did mention at the start, like comfort, and at the same time, there is no point having the most economical shoe if it is also uncomfortable. I think of the On, I can't remember what the model name is of the On shoe, but
Strike, is it Cloudboom Strike?
Yeah, and that tears people's Achilles up, doesn't it? So yeah, it might be the most economical, but you've also annihilated your Achilles by the end of the marathon. But apart from comfort, is there anything else that you sort of tend to see as maybe an indicator that this shoe might work better for someone?
Yeah. So I mean, I can talk to the comfort thing for a bit too. I'm not running that on shoe you're talking about, but I always kind of phrase it this way: a shoe that is uncomfortable is not likely to be your most economical shoe. Like if you're uncomfortable when you're running in it, I'd be willing to bet it's probably not going to test your most economical. On the flip side, like just because a shoe is comfortable doesn't mean it's going to be your most economical, because you can have like a variety of shoes that are comfortable enough, I think, right? And the one study, this is like pre-AFT lit, the one study that I can't cite on top of my head, but I can think of the data. They kind of broke comfort into like quintiles, and the only like bracket there that was associated with like worse or better economy was like the lower quintile, like the most uncomfortable shoes were associated with bad economy, but like, the other 80% weren't very discerning, right? So I kind of think of that in terms of a comfort filter there, but when it comes to economy. But so are there other factors that people could look at if they're not in the lab? Heart rate's one thing. You can go do like a controlled session on the treadmill, 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, and duplicate mirrored sequence and just measure heart rate. The thing about heart rate is it drifts more than VO2 does across the session. I mean, even in a lab that's temperature controlled, unless your lab's 55 degrees or something, like you're still going to see some drift in a 70-degree Fahrenheit lab, even with some airflow and stuff. So I think heart rate's going to drift more on those later reps. And there's just also smaller differences between heart rate. You might stay 155, 156 beats per minute, like almost the whole thing. And just not as big like percentage differences. So I think it's harder. I think when we have shoes that are like, 4 or 5% difference economy wise with VO2 or energy expenditure, like we're probably picking up heart rate differences in those shoes too. But from like all the data sets that I have on multiple subjects and stuff, like usually it's harder to make the same conclusions with heart rate alone when there's like smaller differences. So perceived effort's not, a bad thing if you get in tune with perceived effort at a given pace, if that pace feels easier for you, then it's probably a good indicator. So I think there's some other options like that. In terms of like components of the shoe, most things that are going to be marketed as like a AFT or super shoe now are going to have the compliant resilient foam. There's different formulations of that. Probably like the biggest thing that still distinguishes brand to brand is sort of like what is their compliant resilient foam. Is it PIBA? Is it some new materials? And kind of how that's formulated can vary quite a bit. So by looking for like, squishy, bouncy foam with the plate and that the shoe overall is lightweight and comfortable, I think those are probably some good takes.
Do you ever get people to guess? Because that's what before I share the data with someone, I always ask them to rank, right?
Yeah.
You come in with 3 shoes, which you think is the best and which do you think is the worst? And I've not done this with loads of people, probably like 6 or 7, but no one has ever got it right.
Yeah. So with that first study we did with the, 12 subjects at 6-minute mile pace, 7 different super shoes, we had them pick which one they would use if they were racing a 5K and which one they would use if they were racing a marathon. And they weren't bad at like picking a top 3 shoe of theirs, right? Like it probably had like decent economy for them, but yeah, by and large, people didn't necessarily pick their best shoe. So I think people get in the ballpark. Now the question is like, how much of a difference is a meaningful difference, right? And that's probably an important thing if people like going to labs to test this, like, in the controlled way that we test on like a quality metabolic cart that we've established, differences as like small as like 0.8%, like less than 1%. I think that we can confidently make conclusions with, but that's not going to be the case on like all metabolic carts or all protocols. And so, if people are kind of guessing a shoe that's not the best, but it's within 1% of that, the best shoe for them, then it might be kind of a wash in the kind of equipment noise and protocol noise. But I'd say by and large, people aren't always the best at it.
And we've sort of talked through like the protocol that you use for your case studies and maybe what people can do to test themselves. Is that a similar protocol to what gets used by yourself and by others in research, or is it does a published study use a slightly different protocol for testing shoes?
Yeah, so what I described there is what I use for case study testing, but also if we've got a research project with multiple subjects, that's the typical design that we would see depending on how many shoes you're testing. Maybe if you're wanting to test more speeds, you have like, an extra sets that you're doing for that other speed but yeah, that's typically. So one criticism of that protocol is that it's like, oh, you're only looking at a 5-minute window, right? Or 2 5-minute windows when your legs are fresh. And that's probably the best starting point, just to see like on fresh legs, all other things equal, what does this look like? But people will be like, oh, what about the end of a marathon, right? And obviously those studies are harder to do, to like have you come run 2 hours at marathon pace and then let's switch up these shoes on you, right? And we might need to do that on multiple weekends or something if we've got too many comparisons to make. And so there is a little bit, I know you guys have talked about durability on y'all's podcast. And so there's a little bit of research. I think it's data that's under review right now. Ian Hunter, the biomechanist at BYU, really good runner himself. He's got a YouTube channel. If you check out Ian Hunter's YouTube channel, he talks about some of their durability data with AFT, and you can kind of see, right, like economy falls apart the longer and longer that you go. And so you see like oxygen consumption drifting up, even though speed is held constant, right? And so economy's deteriorating. But when you look at the data that he's got there on like AFT versus standard shoe, that drifting up is mitigated some. It's reduced some for the AFT shoe. So I think both on fresh legs, how we traditionally have looked at things, and more prolonged durations, there's good evidence there of like the shoes helping economy. But yeah, I don't think the fresh leg thing is useless. I think it's probably pretty useful the way we've approached it.
Yeah, it would be, you do have a clear starting point, right? Like if you're saying like, oh, yeah, at the end of a marathon, but that's not, it can't be controlled. Maybe we talked about with the durability stuff, cyclists for decades have done, X amount of joules of work and then, done a climb or whatever to measure their durability, which is a bit more controlled. Like maybe you could, do an amount of work and then measure the shoes, but it's still not as good as a fresh state, is it? And you can argue like, yeah, after an hour of running, maybe it's not fresh, but yeah, it's sort of, I guess, splitting hairs. Maybe like it's the best of what we can do.
Yeah, I think it goes back to like what is your research question, and then like what's a feasible way to like approach that research question. So I think both kind of styles and approaches could be meaningful depending on what the question is, right?
I guess it's also like for most of a marathon, you're not in a complete hole, are you? You are.
Yeah.
You're obviously going to be fatigued, but it's going to be a gradual progression in that fatigue level and loss of economy. It's like, so in terms of if it's helping you out for most of a race, then great. There is one study that I can't cite it. I'm pretty sure it's an Andy Jones one, or he's associated it, where they looked at running economy after doing some downhill running to induce muscle damage.
Matthew Black and Andy Jones's group.
Yeah, and they found that economy was worse. Economy was worse after the eccentric loading in the super shoes, but still better than a control shoe. So the super shoes were still giving you an advantage, even though economy had gone down relative to a control shoe.
Yeah, I know that paper. The interesting thing in that paper is they did all of the muscle biopsy work expecting to see a reduction in muscle damage, right? Because that's kind of like one of the strong anecdotes with the super shoes is reduce muscle damage, whether it be in training or racing. But they didn't see any differences in muscle damage in the biopsy and blood work in that study. I think part of it was probably due to that downhill protocol. It just trashed everyone's legs in both conditions. But
Go on, Owain.
I was going to ask, just if we're talking about downhill running and different sort of elevations or like you mentioned that you've done Boston. Like, do you think that there's any sort of scope for looking at super shoes and different elevation profiles? So like you could test someone going downhill and uphill in the super shoe, and do you think there would be meaningful differences? And
so there's a couple papers that have looked at that. Not my. I've done some case study testing on that myself, but not my lab for the published work there. But Clarissa Whiting and Roger Crum used the Vaporfly on. They mimicked the Boston Hill, so I want to say it was like 5% gradient. They did up, flat, and down. And they showed that going up, from like the 4% they had shown for that shoe on like flat ground, going up maybe it was reduced to like high 2s or something. So it was actually like a little bit less benefit going up. But still very beneficial. And then down, everything's noisier going down because people have different ways, like bigger disparities in economy running down. You can see some people just bomb down the hill and like, my knees are broken back here and I'm shuffling along or something, right? So they didn't like see differences on the down versus the flat, but there was a reduction in the benefit going up, but still certainly beneficial. So now no one to my knowledge has done like to see if there's some interaction, whereas this shoe's better on the flat and this shoe's better uphill, right? I don't think there's any published work to my knowledge that did that. That's what I case study tested. I was like, okay, I know the Alphafly is my best shoe, on the flat. What about uphill though? Do I get less benefit uphill? Or like, And I think when I did that case study testing, it's been a while since I did that, but I think the Vaporfly and the Alphafly kind of like converged a little closer to each other on the uphill for me, but the Alphafly was still the better shoe at the time for me there. So yeah, and I think in that paper, that Whiting and Crown paper, they hypothesize some maybe what some of the reasons are, but don't like, fully pin that down, whether it's like maybe the mass is more of a concern uphill, maybe the cushioning is less beneficial with like reduced forces uphill. And you could hypothesize a variety of ways maybe, but that's the extent of the work I know there. I think Ian Hunter and Jared Ward done a Saucony study on that too. I think with the Saucony shoe they looked at, I don't think they saw differences. But
which shoe are you? There seems to be a sort of a load of shoes that have been announced recently and come out that are pretty exciting, like that Saucony shoe. Like seems super squidgy. Then you got the Puma you've already mentioned. Asics have just released their Ray, haven't they? Their Metaspeed Ray, which is like we talked about already, a stripped down lighter version. Do you think we're still making advancements in shoe tech, or do you think we're pretty much there and we're not gonna get a shoe that's obviously gonna make us 10% more economical?
Yeah.
Do you think like 4-5% is probably the limit?
I mean, that's a great question. And like, you could definitely find me quoting, like, I think the big step change has already happened, like within a year or two ago, I've been saying that. Right. And then this Puma shoe just came out and beats out the, top Nike Adidas shoes on the market by 3%. And that's like, whoa, that's a big number. Right. And then even, the one thing in that Hokamer preprint, they didn't have a control shoe. It was just against other super shoes. And so the numbers are like, 3% better than what is presumably the top super shoes now. But it's not like the original studies where we had a control shoe to say like, okay, are we really 7% better now? Or is it still in that, 4% range? It's like, what's the ceiling of like how much better we can get? And I always kind of go back to like, I've tested Crocs, right? Like garden clogs Crocs, right? And those are like 8% worse than my control shoe, and maybe like a 12% spread between like the Alphafly. So I'm like, all right, anytime someone starts showing me numbers that are like 10% plus, I'm like, I don't know, man, you can go run in like rubber boots to be that bad, So it's like, certainly there has to be like some ceiling on how economical we can make ourselves. But that's why it's like when I case study tested myself on the Puma shoe, it's like, I always have the same control shoe. And it's like, yeah, it wasn't 4%, it was 5.8, 6%. So yeah, if I say we made the next big change and it's going to level off now, I could be wrong again. But I think it goes back to like how you kind of open things up is like this new tech advanced things, and then we're kind of stripping down things again and weight to like only having the most essential pieces and having it as light as possible. And surely that's going to have some plateau at some point, right? But it's been impressive, I think.
And you mentioned it there briefly, but when we see things like a preprint that ties in with a shoe launch, and even going back to like that original Nike, the 4% paper, are there things that you see in the research or things that people should maybe like look out for when you see preprints and that tie into shoe launches? Like what should people, that if they want to read it themselves, sort of look at with those?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair to be like a little bit skeptical whenever like any study, whether it's a preprint or published study, is like, backed by industry. But I think you look to like the researchers and their record, like no researcher that's got like a really good reputation is going to stake their reputation just for a marketing campaign, you wouldn't think, right? I mean, you can listen to what other experts in the field are discussing. That's the nice thing about preprints is all the methodology and stuff is there. So like people can read it and interpret it and make opinions on it and things. So, and yeah, I think this one will probably play out the same way. Of like some people, the Vaporfly 4% study were like, oh, these are Nike shills, but they weren't. They're like well-established researchers, well-respected researchers, right? And the data bore out like with several independent labs and things. So I'm not always like so skeptical just because something's industry backed that like, oh, there's got to be something nefarious here, right? I'm usually more questioning of things that don't make it into papers from industry backed studies than the things that do. But yeah, I don't see any like red flags with this one by any means. But
Yeah, we sort of had this discussion a few months ago with Andy Sparks, who works for Morton, and sort of saying, well, you're a bit stuck because you either don't have the research, or you have the research, but there's a, down the bottom in the funding, it says that, yeah,
Yeah.
the company involved funded it. So yeah,
Right.
sort of what world do you want to be in? Do you want nothing, or do you want, yeah, research that at least if it's clear and, like you say, it comes from established people
Yeah.
with good records, you can trust that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I respect the brands that if they have the internal data and believe in their product, that the next step is to go, do a university backed study that they supported at least with product, maybe with some more, funding for staffing and stuff. But yeah, I think that's a totally respectable approach. And then over time, right, like part of the job of the sports science field is to, like, have studies that try to replicate that from independent research and things. And so that's played out with the super shoes. That'll play out with supplements, right? We're doing a Martin bicarb study this summer. We've been dabbling with, but that's been one of the fun things for me. Is like it'd be nice to bring in a bunch of industry grants, but it's also really fun to, like, be able to be independent and ask whatever questions you want, and then sort of not have people second guess those kind of things. But
Going back to economy, you've talked about 4% better economy. Does that translate into 4% faster?
yeah, so at slower speeds, maybe it's closer to like 1 to 1. Maybe slower than like 8-minute mile pace or so. At faster speeds, and you think at like sub 3 hour marathoners to elite marathoners and things, I think, right, general rule of thumb of seen people sort of adopt is like 2/3 of the economy benefit shows up as like velocity improvement. So like say you're 3% improvement in the lab economy wise, maybe around 2% velocity improvement on the roads. So we know at faster speeds, the increase in like oxygen consumption at faster speeds is not linear, in part due to like increased air resistance at faster speeds. So that's probably one of the main parts. But there's been some papers, there's some modeling papers out there just on like the aerodynamics and economy, but also some actual like applied studies. Shalea Kip did a really like ingenious design study with Roger Crom, where they measured economy in the lab, and this wasn't super shoes, it was just manipulating shoes, but they added mass to shoes in the lab and showed that sort of like traditional 100 grams, 1% economy decrement, right, in the lab. And then they did time trials, like 3K time trials, I think. So at speeds that are much faster than like, threshold that you wouldn't be able to measure steady state economy in a lab, but speeds that you certainly would think are, relevant to economy being a performance predictor. And that's, they sort of established that link between economy at steady state speeds in the lab to time trial performance at faster speeds, with that design there, by just blinding the subjects to the shoe mass, not letting them like know what was the heavy shoe or light shoe. And that's kind of where a lot of the foundation for those kind of like assumptions have come from. It might be something worth revisiting. I think that's like when we see numbers like 6%, like, okay, if you make an elite marathon 6% more economical, how fast are we running now, right? So I think there's probably some of that should be revisited. I think it kind of goes to like the in line when we stack assumptions on assumptions, our error rates get larger and larger, right? Like I think of that with the drafting stuff. Like when you look at the theoretical stuff on like how much drafting is going to help, with like the most recent 4-minute mile attempt and things like that, right? I think some of those papers kind of stack assumptions on assumptions, but overall, I think that'd be probably a good rule of thumb to follow, about 2/3 the economy benefit to velocity improvement.
And I guess right on to support that, the marathon world record has gone from what 2:02:57. Something like that, pre-super shoe, to 2 hours 30. So what we're talking about, 2.5 minutes. That's less than 4% if my maths is right.
Right. Yeah. I think it's less than the economy benefit, but it's certainly undeniable, like the performance improvements that have happened, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah. And on the women's side, it's the complete opposite, and it's exploded, gone from 2:15 to 2:09. So
yeah,
that is a big step. So probably can't take too much from that.
You briefly mentioned there the breaking four attempt, and I just wondered if we say like this sort of 2016 onward period for the roads is a step change, Have we sort of seen that with the spikes, and have you sort of seen that in some of the work you've done with the super spikes as well?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, you can track the performance time improvements on the track similarly, right? You got less stack height allowed than the roads, but you still have the same type of materials incorporated into the spikes now, right? So you can go back to like when Cheptegei broke his world records. I don't know what year that was off the top of my head, but post 2016, you start seeing the tech in the track spikes as well. So yeah, that was one study we did in the lab. We used a Woodway treadmill with like the rubber slatted belts that you can actually run with spikes on, and it feels just like a track. It's pretty natural. And so we measured economy and kind of traditional spike, old school cheap spike versus the super spikes, and we showed economy was about like 2% better in the super spike. So maybe not the same magnitude as like a big 40 millimeter stack road racing when compared to like a racing flat, but certainly like marked improvements. And one of the limitations though goes back to like how you measure running economy is it has to be at below threshold speeds, which start to have less and less direct application to like track speeds, right? Because you really can't test any faster than 10K pace. But I think if you look at performance models, I think 5K, 10K runners certainly can still benefit from improving economy, and even middle distance runners, right? Like even if the performance prediction models don't always have economy as like the strongest factor for predicting middle distance race performance, it's not hard to think that like if you make someone's economy worse at those distances, that's going to be bad for their performance, right? Like weigh down their shoes really heavy, right? That's not going to be a good thing. So I think, yeah, across the board, you probably see that economy translate, even if it's at faster speeds than what we can test in the lab. And there's been some work too, some Hochhammer's group, they did some spike stuff on the track. They did like some kind of mimicked like a workout where they were running like multiple, I think it was maybe 200 meter reps at like, let's say 1500 race pace or 800 race pace. But there was like self-perceived race effort, right? And so they were blinded to like the speed they were running, and they were blinded to the shoe they had on. And they compared like, how many seconds faster or percentage faster they ran in these different spike conditions. And that it kind of tracks similarly to like the economy stuff we'd see in the lab. So I think on multiple fronts, from the performance time to those sort of experimental trials, yeah, we definitely see the benefits translating there too.
Do you think we've moved to the roads being faster than the track with the limitations to technology on the imposed on the track, which obviously, what was it, 25 mil? Was it 20 millimeters?
It's 20
millimeters.
Yeah, I think they went from 25 down to 20 now, right?
It's 20 millimeters of stack height on the track versus 40 on the roads.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that in the super spike study that we published a few years back now, that was one of the things I was trying to address, because it's not relevant anymore. In the NCAA system until this last year, there was no stack height regulations like World Athletics has. And so you saw NCAA like 10,000 meter champions on the track running in shoes, not spikes, which I always thought was like, oh, that seems like a good move. And that study that we did with the economy, when I said, 2% control spike versus super spike, we actually also had super shoes in the lineup. And we looked to see like if there was a difference in, say, like an Alphafly versus Dragonfly shoe versus spike. Some people, why would you compare that? But it kind of gets at this idea of like, if you run in your most economical shoe, even if it's a little bit heavier, like that probably is going to help your performance in longer distance races. So we didn't see big differences. There were some people that like had greater than 1% difference, like in a shoe versus a spike. And so certainly if that person had an option on a track environment, I'd say go with that, right? But so if you extend that to your roads question, obviously you're not going to run in spikes on the road. But if you had an individual that like higher stack road shoe offered them better economy than a lighter weight super spike, then yeah, you could see sort of like how you can make that jump to where that person in theory should be able to run faster in the conditions that allow that shoe to be legal, right? Like on the roads versus on the track. So yeah, I could see how that could be plausible for some people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that surprised me in this Faith Kipyegon breaking 4 attempt was that, considering it was not going to be record eligible anyway because they're being paced by men think that was the only limitation actually, but it was being paced by men, so it wasn't record eligible. I thought she might be in some sort of something that looked a bit more like a vapor fly with spikes in the forefoot or something like
Yeah.
that, rather than just a spike that's apparently legal from what I
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah. And that's that, you know, kind of with that train of thought, like when we did the Joubert spike comparison and just like talking to runners in that study, because we had some like pretty fast collegiate runners who did that study. We even tested a few of them from like just some anecdotal testing at even faster speeds, like some of the really fit ones who could test below 6 minute mile pace, like down at like 520 pace or so, to see if there was any kind of like intersect to where like, okay, when it gets really fast, then the spike's more useful. And, you know, people would be like, oh, well, you need the traction or the grip. And it's like, well, you could add that to, you know, a higher stack shoe as well if you really needed it. But yeah, I don't think it's probably not lucrative for the shoe brands to like try to roll that out, because that shoe is not going to be something that like can be used for competition or sold to the masses as a part of like the marketing campaign around it, right? But whether or not that could lead to a faster time, maybe so, right? Like if you had a spike like that was a little more stacked, maybe so, but it's harder to see that going to like market or being something that people really investigate if it's not going to be able to, you know, be sold.
I guess just on that sort of where you mentioned the crossover between wanting the sort of grip from a spike and the super shoe, if we talk about trail shoes and where there's been a big increase in sort of super trail shoes, I think is the right term. Is there, do you think there's an interaction there between, obviously you potentially need grip depending on the surface, but then if you're, you know, Western States was the past weekend, if you're running 100 miles, there's quite a lot of scope for a super foam to improve your performance and improve your durability across that distance. Have you
Yeah.
sort of seen that being borne out in the research so far, or
So we've got a project that we worked on over the last year, and we've got like some conference abstracts out on it. We might try to publish it as like kind of a pilot study idea, but we looked at 8 runners. They were running on the trails and the treadmill at like self-selected 50K trail race effort. And they ran in a control trail shoe and a mass matched AFT trail shoe. We used the Ultrafly just as a starting point, since it had some of the similar elements like the foam and the plate that you've seen in the traditional AFT. And what we've seen so far from that study with that smaller sample and a slower sample of runners too than like you're talking about folks racing Western States, was like a smaller magnitude of benefit, you know, instead of like the 2.8 to 4% benefit that we've seen at like the faster speeds in the road shoes, like maybe closer to like 1%. So maybe a smaller magnitude of benefit and not as like, at least with that sample currently, not as like strong of an effect. So I think there's probably something there. I think in terms of why AFT may or may not work as good on the trails, I think getting that right blend of ingredients for like the particular use is probably important. But I think, you know, we showed at slower speeds the shoes maybe not being as beneficial. So that kind of translates to, you know, ultra distance trail racing. You're looking at slower speeds. You know, the biomechanist purists will talk about like the stiffness of the treadmill that you test on. You don't want a treadmill that's really compliant or bouncy, because that has been shown to like impact economy, independent of footwear. Just so you have a shoe that like absorbs a lot of your shock, a treadmill that absorbs a lot of your shock. And so you can kind of like take a similar corollary to like the trails, right? Like really soft surfaces might, you know, impact how that foam like interacts, rebounds. And then even like uneven surfaces, when you start thinking about the high stack and the plate that is more rigid and kind of dictates your movement path maybe a bit more. So I think there's a lot of reasons to see like maybe why it could be reduced, or you need to sort of blend those elements up differently to really hit things right. But yeah, it's harder stuff to measure too, right? It's like the treadmill. We've done some road testing with like a motorized scooter or an electric scooter with cruise control, comparing the benefits of the shoes on the roads versus the treadmill, to kind of get at the idea of like laboratory testing versus how it's really interacting with the environments you run on. And we saw similar benefits in both conditions. Now take that to the trails though. my scooter can't ride on the trails so well. So it's like we're relying people like run at a steady pace. You normalize oxygen consumption to like their running speed or like cost of transport. And people are pretty good at actually running the reps at like similar speed. But yeah, it definitely takes some more creative like field testing protocols I know from publishing, from submitting stuff to journals to review, people are like, oh, field testing. It's like, why didn't you do things this way? Or why did you have all this? It's like, well, it's not the lab. It's a little bit harder to control for every single element. but I think you got to kind of like try to tackle that approach to really know those things.
One more then, environment. What about cross country, which I guess is faster speeds but softer surfaces? And I mean, when I think cross country, I think UK cross country, where it's a bog compared to probably a dry golf course. But I guess
I could wear my alpha flies on some of the cross country courses around here. I think it'd be just fine. But I mean, I think I would suspect that like when stuff gets really boggy and soft, the foam has less of a benefit, right? If you're thinking about like the squishy foam that stores and returns energy, if you're just bogged down on your surface already, maybe not rebounding really at the time you need it. Maybe the stiffness of the plate is still useful, but so I think without having like a really set loop that's kind of standardized, and do some portable net cart work, it's hard to really know that. But in theory, I would think maybe reduced a little bit. Yeah.
I was curious. This is maybe getting like potentially way too nerdy for our listeners, but you do some stuff with the VO2 Master. How do you sort of find that compared to so I guess to explain to people, the VO2 Master is a portable device compared to the sort of fixed lab based equipment. How do you sort of find that? Because I've done some reading from some work that I've done myself, and it maybe has some drawbacks, but then the benefit being that you can go out to the trail or to a cross country course and test a bit. But how do you find doing that and that sort of compromise?
Yeah. So I think, using it as like an in-lab net cart, probably not ideal. I think if you've got a better option, like a Parvo or something, when I quote like 0.8%, like typical error percent difference, like control to control, to measure differences that small, that was like with our Parvo metabolic cart using that duplicate protocol. I always, any study I'm going to do, I try to at least get some preliminary reliability numbers on, like whether we're on the roads or the trails or using a different metabolic device like that. I think from more like kind of internal small sample reliability on that, rather than like 0.8%, probably closer to like 1.2 to 1.5%. So you need an intervention that can rise above that difference, right? To like make confident conclusions. So like if we were testing, and there was a time in my place I've been the last few years where I didn't have as good a metabolic cart. And so if I was bringing people in the lab who wanted to test shoes on like a device like that, we would just do more reps or maybe do multiple days to like really make more confident conclusions. But that is one of the challenges. But the fact that it's portable is nice. We actually use that device for that road versus treadmill study and the road versus trail study. The one thing I observed with the VO2 Master, I think it tends to read low. And then if you're using it outdoors where you're like moving through the air, it can read even lower. I think part of it is like the airflow coming back through the user piece and like ventilation being deflated some. We actually had an issue with a paper we had reviewed on that study. Like the main point of that study was to see if the percent benefit of the shoes differed between treadmill and roads, which it didn't. But because we had lower readings overall on the roads, it caused like validity concerns with the device and the reviewers, and we went round and round about it. I think it's a nice price point. That device is one of the benefits, but I think you got to take some considerations in how it gets used. But you see it around more and more because of the price point of it. But it's like $6,000 compared to like the Cosmed's K5 or whatever is like 40 grand or something plus, right?
Yeah. There was paper, wasn't there? Was it last summer it went out just reviewing loads of different metabolic carts and their reliability and
Bas Van Horen paper.
Yeah, Boss has that paper. Yeah, and so that VO2 Master didn't fare as well in there. And I think reliability way more than validity when it comes to like the kind of footwear stuff we're doing, because whether you call like my VO2 at this speed 40 or 45, I really just care that that's consistent, across the same conditions. So now when I introduce this new experimental intervention, that's an observable difference. And so not that validity doesn't matter, but I'm usually more interested in reliability because that dictates the differences you're able to discern. So, and I would say that device, like it does pretty decent in terms of reliability. Like even out on the roads, like if it's reading lower across all the reps at that fixed speed on the roads. Which
as long as it's
is
systematically lower, it doesn't matter, I guess, does it? Yeah.
Well, except for the reviewers who reviewed that paper last for us.
It depends on what you're looking at as well, isn't it? But in the case of comparisons, then what seems to work all right. One thought I've had, which I've only like played around with myself as a bit of a case study, is we've mentioned a few times about the issues that we can't reliably look at oxygen cost at faster speeds. Because we can't account for that anaerobic capacity. There's obviously a drift in oxygen consumption as you get faster. Have you thought about looking at a series of submaximal speeds? So, okay, say someone's threshold is 17 kilometers an hour. We're going to do a stage at 14, 15, 16 kilometers an hour and extrapolate that upwards and see what that looks like across different shoes. If you follow what I'm saying there.
Yeah, just to see if that like relative difference holds steady or if it appears like there's some interaction that might develop where, and I mean, I think so with the super shoe lit, first, like the early studies, original prototype paper from Hogamer, Kyle Borns had an independent paper that followed that up with both men and women. They do look at multiple speeds and kind of the benefits that they saw hold steady across like those multiple speeds. When we looked at the really slow speeds, we saw reduced benefit and like maybe a bit interaction there as well as like even further reduced benefit at like the 4:15 versus 3:30 marathon. But whether or not like there starts to be some like differences in shoes across those speeds, I haven't seen any studies like show that. But there's not a lot of studies in the lit that actually are comparing like multiple brands of shoes, right?
Yeah, it's expensive to do.
But yeah, so I guess, I mean, from what I've seen at like the steady state speeds, multiple speeds, I don't see any like drift where it's like, okay, you were at 7-minute mile pace, you're at 4%. At 6-minute mile pace is pretty similar. Like I have some case study data on myself that like it seems to from the really slow to the faster, like that more disparity. But yeah, I don't know if that would solve the problem for us, or maybe just have more questions. I think some things I like that model of like the within session mock workout at like perceived race effort, where you have people do, okay, you're going to do 6x800 and we're going to alternate shoes and I want you to run a perceived 5K effort, right? And you have the normal recovery that you might have, maybe a little more recovery than you normally would. And you blind them to time. Now, in that case, you need to blind them to the shoe condition too, because when we're doing like submaximal test in the lab for running economy, we're just measuring your physiology, right? We're not measuring your effort. And so effort doesn't like come into play really when we're measuring like submaximal steady state running economy tests. So it doesn't really matter if you blind the people to the shoe or not. But if you're going to go do like perceived race effort or time trials or something where your subjective effort impacts the outcome of interest, right? Then you need to more like blind the subject to the shoes. But so I think that's a way to do that is you don't show them the paces you say you run at perceived race effort. If the shoe is useful, it should make you run faster at perceived race effort, right? But you just need to make sure they don't know what shoe they have on. So it's like either you have to like, wear shoe booties or like spray paint the shoes or, that come into play. One thing that I'm trying to do next, actually, I'm in transition between universities this summer, but one of the first projects I want to do next is to try to incorporate SMO2, some muscle oxygenation stuff with like the Moxie monitors. And, it's localized, but looking like most of the effects of these shoes is likely on like the plantar flexors, so looking at gastroc or something and looking at muscle oxygenation at probably starting out just at like steady state aerobic speeds where we know there's a benefit, quantifiable benefit systemically, see what that looks like locally in the muscle, and then go to like, above threshold speeds where the oxygen consumption is not going to be a steady state measurable thing, but see how that changes with the muscle oxygenation. And maybe that be a way to like discern that. Because yeah, even in like the shorter distance, like sprint spikes, you've seen advancements in tech. And I've had sprint coaches ask me like, oh, hey, how can we test this in our athletes? So that would be interesting if we can kind of glean anything from that. But
yeah. And I guess, we're confident they work at fast speeds, aren't we? Like I'm just because you can get really fit athletes who have got thresholds that are exceptionally high and get them running at 19, 20 kilometers an hour, 5-minute mile pace, and they are in a steady state and they're seeing benefits.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. That's the
I've
other thing.
personally
It's
done
like,
I've done 12 times 5 minutes at 19 kilometers an hour with 3 different shoes. I mean, I've done it three different times. Three trials in each shoe, and there's consistent differences between shoes.
Yeah, I always chuckle when like slower guys like me are out there saying like, oh well, yeah, that Alpha Flight shoe is great for marathon, but you can't run it in the 5K. And I'm like, well, what's your 5K pace? Because it's probably the same pace that guys like Dan just tested at and showed it's still really beneficial, right? And so it's like the idea that like all of a sudden at faster relative speeds for yourself, that like your most economical shoe is not the best one still. I've always kind of question that train of thought. But yeah, it's like, that's the same shoe that Kipchoge broke 2 hours in, right? So you're telling me I can't run a mile in it if that's my mile pace? Like, what's wrong with that?
Yeah. I for a long time, my 5K PR PB was in the Alpha Flies. And I was the only one on the start line in Alpha Flies.
No,
you can't run fast in Alpha Flies. Well, if you're the most economical in it at sub-maximum intensities, you're probably going to be the most economical.
That's your
speeds
5K
actually
pace.
aren't that much faster.
Right. Yeah, no, I think your point's a good one. You look at the faster people who we know that shoe's economical for. I mean, what's Kipchoge's marathon pace in that? Like,
like 4:40 a mile pace faster, isn't it?
That'll do for pretty much any race distance I'm doing these days. That'll be fine.
Did you have many more questions, Dan? Because I had one to finish off, but
you go for it. I think I'm done.
Moving slightly away from physiology specifically, but just really wanted to know what are your sort of favorite ever shoes. But if we maybe split them pre super shoe and post super shoe, what are your favorite ever shoes?
Oh man, favorite ever shoes. Well, I think anybody who followed me the last 4 or 5 years, OG Alpha Fly, I definitely have loved that shoe, and I'll still probably put plenty of miles in that shoe. Even though I'll have to start racing in the Fast R3 now. But so that's probably super shoe era. If I go way back, I'm old, y'all. I've been running a long time. So I'm like, if you look at my spike comparison, that was like an old pair of Kennedys. I remember those being pretty popular way back. I've never really been like one who stayed in the same trainer or something, for like a decade. I get maybe three goes in a row with a maker model and then switch things up. So it's hard to think. I do my standard control shoe that I have, like the Asics Hyperspeed that I use as my control shoe in all my comparisons. That was like my tempo 10K flat in college, and so it was like they restarted the numbers, right? That's the shoe that Ryan Hall, before Mance just broke his half marathon American record, had run it in so many years ago, and that record stood forever. So yeah, I think that's probably like a beloved, just like classic racing flat. And it's really, we had people in our studies who use that shoe and they're like, this is a nice shoe. It just feel like, you can like feel everything's going on, but it's comfy. It's like rides nice. It's like, so yeah, maybe I'll go with that one for my old school.
It's something nice about putting on an old school flat. I find I've got a pair of Saucony Fast Twitches, which were one of like the last like flats they made, I think, before super shoes came out. And I just do, it's got more cushioning than like some of the ones I used to run in, but it feels very hard. And I just use it for strides and things like that. So I think I want to be a bit more biomechanically like normal in quotation marks, but it does feel fun. I think I do obviously love a big bouncy shoe, but just running in something a bit close to the ground, a bit more, you can feel the earth beneath your feet. For me, it brings me back memories of running as a kid. I just feel like I'm a kid again on a Tuesday night running around the track.
Yeah.
But I couldn't do all the mileage in that shoe.
Shades of the barefoot minimalist movement, right? It's like, that's the thing, is like, you don't have to have all or nothing, right? Like, don't go run all your miles in super shoes, or don't go run all your miles minimalist or barefoot, but like a nice blend of those probably makes good sense. And if there's any like running shoe injury risk data that's at all like substantive, it's people who like mix up shoes more, have more variability, might be associated with reduced injury risk. Otherwise, like most of the running shoes industry's efforts to impact injury risk has not been fruitful.
Yeah. So don't go
Yeah.
and get him a Vibram 5-finger and do all your mileage in that then. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
So no, wear a pair of Crocs. You'll only be 10% less efficient.
So feels so good come race day, won't it? Like you go.
There's actually, I don't know if y'all seen the guys who actually, there's a few guys who've like done some world record type attempt stuff in Crocs that are like low hour half marathoners, like 105, 106
it's obscenely
guys.
fast. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the trick with Crocs is to make sure they fit snug. Like you don't want to feel like your toes are like having to hold the shoe, like, your flip flops holding on. Like, so like thick socks and a snug fit or something. You're probably better off than when I tested them.
Cool. I think that's we'll leave it on Crocs for now.
Sounds good.
Really appreciate the time, Dustin. Like we said at the start, if people want to follow you on social media, it's Lab Rat Rundown on Instagram. I think you're definitely on Twitter, right? So I think that's where
I don't really do much on Twitter. Now lately I don't do a ton on Instagram, but I'm on Instagram. So, and I don't have millions of posts, so it's not hard to go back and look at sort of chronicle of things that I've done over the years.
Yeah, it's a really nice, like I said at the start, the way you present it is really nice, and yeah, really cool to see the research that you're doing, and so seeing some of it hit the live day as well. Because yeah, like you said, probably doesn't always. But yeah, thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Good chat.